So welcome to this session, which I will be moderating. And when you have four very dear friends in the panel, the moderator is vulnerable. So I'm a vulnerable moderator because they are very dear friends, and all of them are exceptionally brilliant. So long back, I think I once boasted before a friend saying that all my friends are brilliant. Then he said, but your friends can't say this because you are among them. So, after that, I hated logic and statistics. So we have now four very creative, brilliant panelists, and the subject is, or the theme of today's panel discussion is between two worlds. Actually, it's slightly misleading because these panelists inhabit many worlds, so not just two. For instance, Professor Rohit Manchanda there, sitting on my extreme left, he's a scientist by profession, by training, but he has written and published three novels, out of which three have won awards. And whenever he writes a manuscript, it gets an award. And that doesn't get published after that. So awards don't do a world of good to him. And Sumana, she is a poet, a hardcore academic, but no. So- but she writes poetry, writes a book titled How I Became a Tree. And then recently she has written a book titled Provincials. And now here is Saikat Majumdar, professor at Ashoka. Again, writes high voltage academic books, Aesthetics of Banality. Did you write that? Yes. I was scared. Because I saw his book. I occupied his office. I was given his office in Ashoka University, and I used to browse through his bookshelf. And I found this book, and I was terrified. How can one write Aesthetics of Banality? And I thought that he would be a kind of formidable dry as dust scholar. I think there is this famous story of George Eliot's, there is this episode in Middlemarch. So there is a great scholar, and somebody said that if you take a drop of his blood and put it under a microscope, you'll see commas and semicolons and colons. So I thought that Saikat would be a scholar like that. But then I had the opportunity of reading Firebirds, one of the most moving novels written by anyone. So he inhabits two very apparently incompatible worlds. And Dr. Sukrita Paul Kumar. Oh, okay. Maybe you look more academic than them. Okay, Sukrita. She's a poet, critic, edits Indian literature. She also, her life encompasses so many apparently incompatible domains. So we have examples in history, in science, in history, where people have done similar things, but the number is dwindling. For instance, take Jacob Bronowski. When I think of Rohit, I think of Jacob Bronowski, this great science historian, scientist. He also wrote a wonderful book on Blake, William Blake. So it was possible in those days. Or David Dyches would write a book on Scotch whiskey. And Edward Hobsbawm wrote a book on jazz. So I think that their number is dwindling. So these perhaps belong to a rare and vanishing species. So before they vanish altogether, let's let's listen to them talk about how they reconcile these very, as I told you, apparently incompatible domains of creativity, scholarship, academic life. So should we begin with or with Rohit? One. No, I think let's begin with you. Okay. How do you reconcile all these
Oh,
apparently
okay.
compatible?
All right.
Or is there a tension, or it happens effortlessly in your case?
Well, I don't think anything is effortlessly done. And yet, um, I think somewhere all whatever I do, whether it's editing or it's writing poetry, here. Oh my God, I don't want to with my lipstick on. Hello? Okay, you can hear me? Right. So I really feel that, I mean, I was a very ardent teacher till not too long ago. So that too, why didn't you mention this? My homework was not done properly. Yeah. So, but whether it's teaching or learning or editing, publishing, writing, somewhere I think all of it comes together anyway. One informs the other. But the moment you talk about between two worlds, uh, if I'm permitted to define it in my own way, you see, in as far as I'm concerned, I think, well, as you rightly said in the beginning, that it's not just two worlds; it's many, many worlds that one oscillates within. But in my case, I think one of the things that I keep um, talking to myself about is that when I was in Kenya, I want to start like that. When I was in Kenya, I was born and brought up there. And my father, like all fathers, very dominating, extremely dominating figure in the house, as a writer though, but still, he would constantly be saying, we have to go back home. And we were in Kenya. So he totally denied me and my brothers the idea of homeland in one sense. And we always thought of, okay, somewhere else is the home. Somewhere else is the home. And then 15 years later, when you actually come to India, and I would keep saying, when I was at home, it was different. So I really don't know. Within the country, within India itself, there has been this whole idea of where to settle because both my mother was also born and brought up in Kenya. So for her also, it was a matter of, okay, my father said, okay, roots, I'm back into my roots. There was this concept. Though he had lost his roots in Sialkot because he was a refugee after partition. So, as a family of rootless people, going place to place, I've always been in different worlds. One is the imaginary world, and one is the real world. And I'm always finding it difficult to cope with the real because to me, what is real is in the imagination. Perhaps that's what makes me write poetry. It's because one is trying to work it out and not just that. I mean, where actually in terms of actual roots, I have also thought of like Shravana has been talking about, I'm a tree. I think I married a tree. Honestly, I mean, it was like I'd found every city that I go to, which I like and I want to stay on for some time. I just choose one big tree, big tree. Except for in one place, it was just the fig tree which I chose. But otherwise, it was the chinar in Shimla. And every time it makes me come back to Shimla, that tree. So I'm so connected with it. And going for a walk, I've also identified one tree. There are trees and trees where I go. And yet, I'm talking about Delhi, and there is a city jungle, there's a city forest I go to, and there is a tree I have identified there also. I don't know how I pick it, but I pick a tree, and then I want to feel it, and it's kind of, it gives me life. So am I between two worlds even there, So yes, I think the tension that you're talking about, the tension that I get as a result of that is the tension that pulls me on both the sides, and therefore a poem might bring both the sides together. So that's how it goes on.
I was absolutely right about you. You encompass so many worlds. So I think Sumana would find so much that's interesting about her. She marries trees. You wanted to become a tree, but she marries trees. So, okay, so I think we should start.
Uh, as you can see, I haven't succeeded in becoming a tree. Uh, in response to your question, Jatin, I think um, it was Whitman who said, "I contain multitudes," and all of us, whether we are sorry, what did I say? What did I? Whitman. Whitman, yes, yeah. So, so it was Whitman, of course, who said,
Sumana, please, the volume has increased here. So please turn up or
okay,
use two.
because between two worlds. Yeah. Is this better? Yeah. So, so I began by saying that I think it was Whitman who said, "I contain multitudes," and it's not just people who create, as in creating art or literature or cinema, who live between worlds, but actually, I think all of us. One of my favorite thinkers, Michel Serres, and I go back to him all the time. I mean, he saves me from situations or questions such as this one. In his book called The Five Senses, he writes about the simultaneity of five senses. So even when, for instance, you can hear me now, but we can also smell the food somewhere here. I can feel the chill of the air conditioning. And so all these five senses are acting simultaneously. So I can't say, "Oh, Rohit, I don't want to see you," and not smell the rest of the air. And so, one can't suppress any one sense. So I think of the simultaneity of the senses as something that is analogous to the different selves that live inside us. Um, Not one is divorced from the other, and yet one is not aware of the other. So, just as my being a wife does not stop making me my parents' daughter or my brother's sister, similarly with the different selves that want to create and live. And creating and living are not different from the other. Um, I don't want to feel like a salad, where the ingredients are separate from the other, as in writing poetry and fiction, which I write very poorly. I mean, bad fiction, so I've stopped. The essay and all these other genres, they come at different times. They bear the impress of history, both mine, but also the moment that we are inhabiting. So while I'm aware that I gravitate towards creating a form that allows me to live across genres. Jatin very kindly mentioned two books, How I Became a Tree and Provincials. Uh, so the publisher's blurb was genre bending, a kind of new genre that has come into being almost, which again is a kind of response to what Jatin is asking, that do you live across genres? I think all of us do, and yet in some moments a particular line comes to me which feels like it can find home or form only in a poem. At some other time, this becomes this inaugurates an essay in my mind. It is possible that the same thing, if they were to be separated by years, the person I was in 2016 or 2015 and the person I am right now, the forms that I have chosen at that point of time might be very different forms now because the selves have also changed. I know I haven't answered this question satisfactorily. I will be thinking about it, Jatin.
So I think Rohit is in the minority of one because all four are teachers of English literature. So I thought I shouldn't be unfair to him. So you take over from. So Saikat can be.
Thank you, and sorry, Shaikar, to have to make you wait. Well, our moderator very kindly, of course, said I have these brilliant panelists with me. Well, while I might sort of just accept that tag, let me just say that our moderator himself is a menacingly brilliant person. Uh, and that to get the rough edge of his tongue is what one fears the most. These selves and worlds. Well, I desperately find myself wishing all the time that I did not inhabit two worlds, because there's a pulling apart kind of effect. It's like a tug of war going inside oneself. Um, when I'm immersed in the world of science, especially the mechanics of doing science. And what I mean by the mechanics is just the administrative side of things, just the humdrum that one needs to do in the first place in order to then get the science done. The mechanics of all that are sometimes so repulsive that I just yearn to be doing my literature, let's say. What I mean by doing my literature is either reading or writing. And it's not just a reaction to the science that impels me to write. There is always an urge as well, an inner urge. There has always been that urge. It just gets magnified by the other side that I inhabit. And when when I get to my writing, well, I find nothing at all repulsive about it. But I know that at some point or of time or the other, I'll need to get back to my professional existence. And I so very desperately wish sometimes that I was just content and happy and overjoyed about being in science itself, just that one domain. So many people are just wired to be absolutely content and rejoice in the one field that they inhabit. And uh, and and with me and with us, I suppose there is always uh, this pull from various directions. The other thing that I wanted to say was that it's not just in two directions that one feels oneself getting pulled. I feel myself getting pulled perhaps in four or five directions simultaneously. And then I feel as if, I just don't have enough time on this planet to indulge any of those desires that I'm overcome by. So, for instance, if we take the world of art in general, if we take the world of music, and my goodness, there is so much over there to relish, but also to attempt. It's as if one's endeavor to write were equaled by one's endeavor to at least comprehend the world of music. Perhaps take some part in that world by playing a few elementary chords on the guitar and belting out a complete paraphrase of a tune. I can never be melodious, but some sort of a paraphrase of a melody. One wishes to indulge oneself, uh, or immerse oneself in so many of these things, and I think perhaps that's what we mean by also having several selves in oneself. And then there is the political self, and then there is the social self. I'm bringing all these into the picture because what I find is that all of them, at some point or another, infuse my writing. When I'm writing my novels, I find that my academic self and or if you will, my neurophysiologist self, because neurophysiology is the discipline in which I work, and my social self and my political self and the self that likes music and literature, of course, and perhaps one or two others that perhaps are too embarrassing to mention. Those selves, they all come together to infuse and inform what I write, and very often subconsciously. I am not making an effort to bring this into play and bring that into play and say, look, I'm weaving a tapestry. Look at the wonders I'm able to perform. But they just not just suggest themselves, but also force themselves upon me and enforce this sort of writing. So I welcome that, and in that particular sense, I welcome the very numerous and disparate worlds that I inhabit. I welcome them, and I won't use the tired old modern day word of embracing them. I don't embrace them, but I welcome the suggestions that they offer, and I welcome the way in which they play into my writing. I think that's all I'll say for now.
I think Jatin has created such a beautiful phrase, between two worlds. You want to stay there. You don't want to belong to any world. So I'm really tempted by that. But I'll just say this, especially for the students and aspiring writers, if there are any here. And it's a kind of a cliche thing, but finding one's voice is really the defining moment. And I think it takes time to find one voice, whether you're a critic or a poet or a novelist. That takes a while. It's almost like you serve time copying. And once you find a voice, and in my writing career, it happened with certain books, I don't think it matters what you write. What you write, it's for me, the difference between fiction and criticism is a generic difference. It's like I think Sukrita and Shimona who both write poetry and prose. I find it more difficult because I don't write poetry. Between criticism and fiction are both in prose. So I think that is the very defining thing. Once you find your voice, then, and I do believe that I've said this before, that I am more of a critic when I'm writing a work of criticism. I'm not so much of a scholar. And this is the distinction I draw between the critic and the scholar. A scholar is someone who kind of gives up their own identity, subordinates their identity to the archive. But a critic, even whether they're talking about a book or a film or a music, they're actually talking about themselves. It's there, the archive is there as a kind of a peg. So obviously the extreme form is if you read a book review by Virginia Woolf, it's like, why do people still read reviews by Woolf, even if they haven't read the book? It's about her. The archive doesn't matter. And in some senses, I've always been drawn to being a critic with a voice. And that explains this books with very strange themes like banality and boredom. Like, who would have, if I was a responsible scholar, I would have written on the nation or race or one of those responsible subjects. Instead, I chose something like boredom in literature. And for me, these subjects also come very imagistically. Shimona, I think, has put it very well, that the play of these five senses, I think that is the really important thing. That when you're writing, it should appeal to more than one sense. It should not just appeal to the brain. It should appeal to your brain. It should bring up a smell. It should evoke a touch. It should do something, like Eliot said. And so for me, this image of the book on boredom really came from being in Calcutta, but waiting in traffic jams. I was caught in a traffic jam, going to government offices, filling up forms, and this kind of boredom of government offices. And I thought, oh, how about literature? What has literature done with that? Then when I wrote the book, The Amateur, I was thinking of the backbencher, somebody sitting right in the backbench, not paying attention to the lecturer, reading a book of their choice. So often my critical books actually start with an image. And then, of course, I do my research, I do things, and it comes together. And then you also realize there are certain important thematic connections. Like education, I guess, is important for all of us sitting here. We teach, we are in universities. And I realize, and I also write a lot about education, but my feelings about education are actually quite mixed. I mean, I have this kind of daytime life as an educator where I think education is a wonderful and empowering thing. I write about liberal education, but I also think education is incredibly repressive. It really suppresses you, it kind of controls you. And of course, this is a kind of Marxist vision of education that, oh, it teaches you gender behavior, it teaches you caste behavior. So all of that is there. So in some senses, while I've written about education, education has come out in a very different way in my novels, which are often two of my, Jatin was kind enough to mention the Firebird. For the Firebird and the Scent of God have been called Bildungsromans, coming of age novels. But I think if you think of a coming of age novel as a story where a person becomes educated, you're born, you get an education, you marry, you kind of get a job, do all the kind of expected things family, society expects you to. My novels are about the failure of that education. So in the Firebird, the boy becomes a kind of a psychological criminal, falls in with bad company. It's a novel about theater. Growing up as a child of a theater actress. In The Scent of God, which is a love story between two boys in a monastic boarding school, it's about moving away from that heteronormative life. So in some senses, I realize I have this nighttime life where people don't come of age, where people do not get the normative education which Bildungsroman seeks to offer, the failure of that education. Even though I actually write columns and op-eds and books saying that, oh, this is great. But deep down, I know what a divided process education is. And I think these are the defining themes that take hold of you as a writer. How you write them is a technical question. That's a secondary question. And so that's obviously my, multiple lives even as an educator. But I think once you find your defining themes of your life, you will express them in different forms and they will come and go. So
Thank you, Saikat. I think we should now take some questions from the audience, and I have a selfish interest in asking these questions because Rohit and Sumana threatened to ask the moderator questions. So in order to stop them from doing that, I now throw the discussion open to the audience and I would take questions.
Not a question, but a kind of postscript to what Choikot said. I think before the emergence of the education system uh, that we uh, that we find ourselves in now, I think we've always. I mean, I think it was Bruno Latour who said we've always been modern. I think we've always been educated. I mean, the people we love, fall in love with, are those that
have been, you are teachers. I think it's very pertinent to be asking these very fundamental questions.
quickly come to the point that was going through my mind. It cuts both ways, because I find that when I'm writing, when I'm engaged in the process, I get so immersed in the sensory qualities of the moment that I'm trying to capture or describe, that I might end up writing paragraphs. And this is something that has literally happened. Uh, I've ended up writing 3 or 4 paragraphs on how an onion on the ground, on the floor, looks when there's a shaft of light from a ventilator falling on it. Now, uh, when that sort of manuscript is passed on to an editor or to a reviewer, one can imagine what sort of response it gets. But it's too self-indulgent. You're not moving on. Where is the story? And now, if it is to be part of fiction, especially, then it seems as if it has to have some propulsive effect, this immersion of oneself in one's own senses and this capture of the sensory. It also needs to have a propulsive effect in itself. It is of no consequence at all. That's the reaction I seem to get. And that's why, as Jatin was saying, it's my unpublished manuscripts that have been getting the awards. This sort of complete submission and yielding to one's senses seems to work for oneself, but not for others. But then again, I say to myself, and I've said this many a time to others also, I write for myself. And partly we can afford the luxury of that sort of thing because we are employed, which brings us our salary and a roof over our heads, and as Jatin also says, an address. But then we can indulge ourselves and write for oneself if it happens to find, if what one is writing for oneself happens to find an editor in sympathy with what has been written, well and good. If not, then you just pass the unpublished manuscript around and see if it gets somewhere.
Two or three quick questions before we... How much time is left? I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Excuse me. So we are actually exceeding the time and we have to manage the whole session. So, yeah.
So, 2 questions.
All right. Two
I-
questions.
I'll
that's
ask my
it.
question very quickly.
And then take all the questions and then they will answer all the questions at the same time.
Summarizing the whole answer.
May I ask the question?
All right.
So I have a question for Rohit. You and Shoykot, I've read your book Firebird and your Speck of Coal Dust. Both the protagonists, Ori is around 10, Vipul is around the same age. One has diabolical thoughts, one has childhood happy thoughts. How did you both think about that and write a novel like that?
Since we don't have the time for 2 panelists to answer, one will answer, the other smile at him.
I'm already smiling at
You answer.
All right. My answer to that is, if you do consider A Speck of Coal Dust, that is the title of the novel that Dia is alluding to. If you do find it to be a happy novel, I'm so very happy. I'm so very glad, because that happy sounding, happy reading novel actually came out of an impulse to escape the present, which I was finding to be very depressing and very oppressive. This was during the days that I was doing my PhD. Again, I spoke about the mechanics of doing science. That was proving to be really quite oppressive. There were other things that I found to be, again, repellent in the moment that I was in. And I wrote this novel as a means of escape. And if you can't end up writing a depressing novel if depression is what you're trying to get away from. So I ended up trying to write a somewhat buoyant account of my of a childhood.
Okay, I wish my question was as thoughtful as that one. But as someone who is writing a thesis and most definitely wants to write a novel, how do you plan this out logistically? 10 hours a day in a private university, research papers, and after that, a novel. How do I make that happen? It's open for everyone to answer.
Okay, I have a slightly related question to that. We're talking about different worlds, both all of you inhabit. So we've been each of you is a teacher, which is a very sort of doing it for others kind of a work. And you're also writers, which is an act of solitude. It is something that one does in total. So how does that play out in your personal lives, sort of, or professional lives, this external world of teaching and mentoring and doing research and being sort of there for others, and yet this inner world that you have, which is full of imagination and characters that don't exist till you put them on paper? So I'm very curious about how sort of it plays out in your personal lives as well.
Rohit is forbidden to answer this question.
No, no, no.
Saika, Shimona,
I just have a ringside view to how he manages it.
Shimona or Saika,
Yeah.
legally forbidden.
Shumona and I are talking of being, we're kind of on the, next to offices next to each other. Actually, there's somebody in between us, just the way Jatin is sitting here. That is Amit Chaudhary. So our offices are right next to each other. So there's a little bit of sociality there.
I think the two questions are actually related. I think I am very fortunate to be teaching in a university now. I used to teach in Bengal's government colleges, where the syllabus was very centralized and I didn't really get to teach what I wanted to. Now I feel very fortunate to be teaching things that I like to. And so the idea of research in that sense, to borrow a word from my neighbor who's a scientist, the classroom is also a lab in that sense. Not just for me, then it would be very self-indulgent and even selfish. But for the students, we're very lucky to be treated. Though I don't know how to teach creative writing, because unlike Shoykot, I don't have an MFA degree, I end up teaching literature. And I don't make a distinction in my head between creative writing and literature. So in response to Shivani, I am a very asocial person, very, very asocial. And I find that human company for whatever duration of time exhausts me. I would have run away from here had it not been for Gautam's session. So I will have to stay back for that. In response to yours, I think, so I'll just explain this. Last term, I had a sabbatical, and I thought I was going to write all the books that were in my head. I did not write a single essay or a poem. So I think the push and pull, the Brownian particle kind of movement that the classroom and its attendant life forces us into will also create periods of time which will never be like white space in the sense that you might be thinking of. And they might not be pauses or stops. That will never happen. But just as living and writing are not separate from each other, teaching and grading and research and everything else that you have to do will also feed your writing, and your writing will be richer for it. Because the aleatory that comes from living and not working, like, say, what's the name of that writer? Blindfolds himself. Jonathan Franzen, like life, where he blindfolds himself, taking himself away from the sensory world, as it were, is very different from the kind of model of writing that, for instance, I believe in, which is to be exposed to all the accidents, the rich accidents of life. I sit down, I don't know where the sentence is going to go. The calling bell rings. The calling bell becomes a semicolon in my sentence. So that is how it works.
I think the volunteers are looking miserable and disturbed. I think stop here. They don't believe in semicolons. Full stop.
Thank you, our panel. It was quite a fun and engaging discussion. I would like to request Ashok sir to come up on the stage and felicitate our panel.
Sir, you are the culprit. You're back. How would
I donate generously. What happens? Rohit will be disconsolate.
You will strangle soon.
He was the one who scored.
I should just fly back tonight. Thank you very much. Let me just say that the prime mover and shaker of this festival is also a writer. Very recently published your book. Yeah, that's quite resonating.
Okay, now we should set the stage free.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Jatin. Yes.
Thanks, Satya, for being so restrained.